Some of the most recognized faces in the world have been permanently changed, not by time, but by choices made in private clinics, at cocktail parties, and in the offices of people who were not always who they claimed to be. These are transformations that shocked the public, ended careers, and in some cases, led to courtrooms. This is shocking celebrity face transformations of 2026 that backfired. The supermodel who went into hiding, Linda Evangelista. For most of the 1990s, Linda Evangelista was one of the most photographed women on the planet. She appeared on the covers of Vogue, Vanity Fair, and Harper's Bazaar so many times that her face became synonymous with the era itself. She was part of a generation of supermodels who didn't just walk runways. They defined what a runway was. Her image was her career, her income, and in many ways, her identity. Then, between August 2015 and February 2016, Evangelista underwent 7 sessions of a procedure called cool sculpting, a non-invasive, FDA-cleared fat reduction treatment that uses controlled cooling to break down and eliminate fat cells. It was marketed as a safe, effective alternative to liposuction. She had it done in a dermatologist's office. It was the kind of procedure that seemed routine. There was no surgery, no general anesthesia, no long recovery period. It was, by every public account, the sort of cosmetic treatment that Hollywood celebrities did quietly and without much concern. What happened next was anything but routine. Instead of reducing her fat cells, the cool sculpting procedure triggered a rare and serious side effect called paradoxical adipose hyperplasia, or PAH. Rather than shrinking, the treated fat cells grew. They hardened. Areas of her body, including her abdomen, thighs, and under each armpit, developed dense, raised masses of hardened fat tissue. The condition is estimated to affect fewer than 1% of patients who undergo the procedure, according to available medical data, though some researchers suggest the actual rate may be higher, since many cases go unreported. Evangelista underwent 2 corrective surgeries. Both failed to resolve the damage. The physical changes left her, in her own words shared publicly on Instagram in September 2021, feeling permanently deformed and unrecognizable. She described going into isolation, retreating from public life entirely, declining work, and watching her peers continue thriving careers while she hid from photographers. She wrote that the experience sent her into a cycle of deep depression. She later told Harper's Bazaar that she could not look at herself in the mirror, that she had to undergo therapy simply to make peace with her own reflection. For a woman whose face and body had been her profession for 3 decades, the psychological weight of that was immense. In September 2021, Evangelista filed a $50 million lawsuit against Zeltic Aesthetics, the maker of cool sculpting. Her legal team noted that Zeltic's marketing material had failed to adequately disclose the risk of PAH at the time she underwent the procedures. The lawsuit also alleged that Zeltic offered corrective surgery free of charge, but only if Evangelista signed a confidentiality agreement. When she declined, the company allegedly agreed to cover costs anyway, then backed out after surgery was completed. The case was settled in July 2022. The terms were never disclosed. Evangelista later returned to modeling, fronting a Fendi campaign, but told Harper's Bazaar in 2025 that she still wasn't fully at peace with her appearance and continued working through recovery and therapy. What makes Evangelista's case particularly sobering is that she didn't go to a back alley clinic. She didn't chase some unproven miracle treatment. She walked into a licensed dermatologist's office for an FDA-cleared procedure and came out permanently changed. Her story forced a broader public conversation about the gap between how cosmetic procedures are marketed and what patients are told about the risks. The cool sculpting company, Zeltic, which had been acquired by pharmaceutical giant Allergan in 2017, fought back with its own public messaging. They launched consumer-facing campaigns and participated in online forums to reassure existing and prospective patients. But the damage to the brand's reputation, at least among a certain segment of consumers, was significant. Evangelista's Instagram post disclosing the outcome received over 177,000 likes compared to the 20,000 to 35,000 she typically received, a signal of just how widely the story resonated. The personal cost extended well beyond the physical. Evangelista had withdrawn from public life for more than 5 years before going public with what had happened. She had watched her industry peers continue working while she turned down bookings and avoided cameras. The years of professional isolation during what could have been peak earning years represented a financial loss that no out-of-court settlement could fully address. She eventually returned to modeling, reappearing in a Fendi campaign in September 2022, a return she described as meaningful but complicated. Even years later, speaking to Harper's Bazaar in 2025, she acknowledged that the relationship she had with her own reflection was still something she was actively working through in therapy. The industry's response to PAH, paradoxical adipose hyperplasia, has evolved since Evangelista went public. Medical professionals have become more explicit in disclosing it as a risk, and some practitioners have incorporated more detailed, informed consent processes for patients considering fat reduction procedures. Whether those changes would have prevented what happened to Evangelista, given that her procedures took place a decade earlier, is impossible to say. What is certain is that her experience changed the conversation, and that her willingness to speak publicly, rather than quietly accept a settlement and disappear, was the reason it did. But if Evangelista's case involved a medical procedure gone wrong, despite all appearances of legitimacy, the next story goes somewhere far darker because the person performing the work was never a licensed physician at all. The fake doctor and the Hollywood elite, Priscilla Presley. Priscilla Presley's name has always carried an extraordinary kind of cultural weight. She was Elvis Presley's wife, the woman who stood beside the king, and long after his death in 1977, she remained one of the most recognizable faces connected to that era of American pop culture. Her appearance was striking: dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that were once described almost universally as doe-like and elegant. She built a business career and appeared on television, and for years, her look aged gracefully. Then, around 2003, she encountered a man named Daniel Serrano. Serrano was an Argentine-born individual who had worked his way into the upper tiers of Los Angeles society. He was charming, well-connected, and presented himself as a cosmetic physician with access to a cutting-edge European formula, an injectable treatment that he claimed worked better than anything FDA approved on the market. He told clients it could permanently eliminate wrinkles. He charged approximately $500 per session. He made house calls. He performed injections at cocktail parties in Beverly Hills, where guests lined up between drinks to receive what they believed was an exclusive, advanced anti-aging treatment. The women who came to Serrano included some of the most recognizable names in Hollywood's social sphere. Priscilla Presley was one of them. So was Shaun King, the wife of Larry King. So was Diane Ritchie, then the wife of Lionel Richie. What Serrano was actually injecting into their faces was not a miracle European compound. It was industrial-grade silicone, the kind of substance used to lubricate automobile parts. He had smuggled it from Argentina. Federal investigators later discovered that he was filling syringes at his kitchen table with unwashed hands from bottles of unapproved industrial chemicals. He was not a licensed physician in the United States. He had no legal authorization to perform these procedures on anyone. The industrial silicone did not behave the way medical-grade fillers do. When injected into human tissue, the body's immune system recognized it as a foreign substance and attempted to wall it off, forming hard masses of scar tissue called granulomas. Several of Serrano's clients developed lumps in their faces. Some experienced partial facial paralysis. Some developed sunken areas where the scar tissue created hollows. Shaun King reported a permanent lump in her lip that made it difficult to speak and drink. Priscilla Presley's face changed visibly. When she appeared on the television competition Dancing with the Stars in 2006, public commentary was immediate and blunt. Her features looked stiff and distorted. The elegant, symmetrical face that had been photographed thousands of times now appeared swollen and uneven. In 2008, TMZ reported that Presley was a victim of Serrano's scheme, and her representatives confirmed she had no knowledge that she had been injected with industrial silicone. The FBI had already been investigating by that point. Serrano was arrested on federal charges including smuggling, conspiracy, and the use of unapproved drugs. In 2006, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison before being deported to Argentina. But the damage to Presley and the other victims was not reversed by his imprisonment. Industrial silicone cannot simply be removed. When it integrates with living tissue, nerves, and blood vessels, surgical extraction becomes extraordinarily complex. Reconstructive surgeons attempting correction must try to excise granulomas one by one, a painstaking process with unpredictable results. To hide residual lumps, doctors often add volume to surrounding areas through fat grafting, which can paradoxically make the face appear fuller and more distorted. That is largely the explanation medical experts have offered for the continued changes in Presley's appearance in subsequent years. Priscilla Presley was not naive or careless. She was deceived by someone who had engineered a social environment in which trust was the product being sold. Serrano's scheme worked because he embedded himself in a world where exclusivity and access were currencies. The lesson embedded in her case is not about vanity, it's about a calculated fraud that used the cosmetic industry as its cover. And yet, as damaging as fraud can be, some transformations that backfired were not the result of deception at all, but of decisions made in good faith with some of the most reputable surgeons in the world that still went catastrophically wrong. The gambler who lost his face, Kenny Rogers. Kenny Rogers was one of the most beloved figures in American country music. His voice was warm and instantly recognizable. His face, broad, bearded, with easy, expressive eyes, matched that warmth. He looked like a man who had lived a full life and wasn't afraid to show it. For fans who grew up with songs like The Gambler and Islands in the Stream, his face was part of what made him feel real. In the late 1990s, Rogers began noticing the signs of aging in his own reflection. He was approaching 60, and after decades in the spotlight, the pressure to remain visually relevant in an industry that increasingly rewarded youth weighed on him. In a 2012 interview, he described the decision plainly. He had the money, he had the time off, and he started asking himself whether a few changes might be worth it. He chose what was considered, at the time, one of the world's best plastic surgeons. This was not a budget operation. This was not a rushed decision made in a back room. Rogers went to the top of the field and paid accordingly. The procedures included a facelift and what appears to have been a combination of a brow lift and eyelid surgery, medically known as blepharoplasty. It is a technically demanding combination because each procedure affects the outcome of the other. When a brow is lifted, it can alleviate the appearance of excess skin around the eyes on its own. If blepharoplasty is then also performed, the removal of additional skin can leave the eyelids dangerously tight, too thin, too hollow, unable to close fully in some cases. That appears to be essentially what happened to Kenny Rogers. His brows were elevated to an unnatural height, giving his face a perpetual expression of surprise. The eyelid surgery removed too much skin, leaving the area around his eyes hollow and strained. The outer corners of his eyes were also altered, lifted in a way that eliminated the natural, slightly downward angle that had given his gaze its warmth. His face, which had communicated so much through expression for decades, became difficult to read. The expressiveness was gone. What remained was tight, smooth, and fundamentally unlike the face his audience had known. Rogers spoke about his unhappiness with the outcome openly, which was notable because few celebrities at the time were willing to admit to cosmetic procedures at all, let alone acknowledge that they had gone wrong. In a 2006 interview with People magazine, he said directly that he was not pleased with what had been done to his eyes. The tightness around his eyelids was bothering him constantly. He was told the surgeon could go back in and attempt a correction. Whether that intervention ever produced meaningful improvement is difficult to say with certainty from the public record. By 2012, Rogers had settled into a kind of rueful acceptance. In a televised interview, he explained that the decision came partly out of boredom and partly out of a desire to remain competitive at a moment when his career had stalled. He said he didn't know what he would have looked like without the procedures. He wasn't sure the aging process on its own would have been kinder, but the regret was evident. This was not the transformation he had been imagining when he sat down in that surgical consultation. His friend Dolly Parton reportedly teased him about the results over the years. Rogers seemed capable of some humor about it eventually, but beneath that humor was the reality, the warmth that had defined his visual presence for decades, those expressive, slightly heavy-lidded eyes that matched the timbre of his voice, had been altered in a way that no follow-up procedure could fully reverse. What makes Rogers' case instructive from a medical standpoint is the specific combination of procedures. Plastic surgery specialists who have analyzed his case have pointed out that a brow lift, when performed aggressively, can create a pulling effect that distorts the entire upper face. Combined with blepharoplasty that removes more tissue than the face can comfortably accommodate, the cumulative result is a rigidity that eliminates natural expression. The eye's ability to convey emotion, warmth, concern, humor, depends on the precise interplay of brow position, skin tension, and the underlying musculature. When that interplay is disrupted, what the face communicates changes in ways that are hard to define but immediately perceptible to anyone watching. For Rogers, a man who had built a career on the emotional connection between performer and audience, that loss of expressiveness in his face had real professional consequences. His music did not change. His voice did not change. But the face that audiences had associated with his music for 20 years had changed profoundly, and the gap between what they heard and what they saw became something they could not stop noticing. Rogers passed away in March 2020. His legacy in music remains enormous, but his case has also become a permanent fixture in discussions about the consequences of overcorrection and the importance of understanding how facial procedures interact with one another. And while Rogers' transformation was the result of surgical miscalculation, the next case involves someone who spent years making changes and then publicly unraveled before millions of television viewers. The man who admitted he went too far, Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell spent decades being the most brutally honest voice in entertainment. As the creator and central judge of shows like The X Factor, American Idol, and Britain's Got Talent, his candor was his brand. Contestants feared his assessments. Audiences tuned in partly to watch him deliver them. His face was everywhere, on television screens, on magazine covers, on billboards, and as the years progressed, that face began changing in ways that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Cowell has never been secretive about cosmetic procedures. He has discussed Botox openly, and in various interviews over the years, admitted that he viewed injectables as simply another form of personal maintenance, as unremarkable, in his words, as toothpaste. He underwent non-surgical treatments including laser resurfacing and a thread-based lifting procedure in 2018. He reportedly got Botox as early as 2005. The problem was the accumulation. Dermal fillers, injected repeatedly over years, can migrate and compound in ways that are not always predictable. A face that looks refreshed after one round of filler may look increasingly unnatural after 5 or 6, as volume builds in areas that were never meant to carry it. What plastic surgeons sometimes describe as filler fatigue set in visibly. Cowell's face grew fuller, stiffer, and progressively harder to read. His forehead became smooth to a degree that appeared unnatural. His eye area showed effects of repeated Botox, drooping that occurs when the muscles responsible for lifting the brow are weakened over time. By the early 2020s, public commentary had become unavoidable. Fans began using terms like AI version to describe how he looked on screen. The word uncanny appeared regularly. In 2022, Cowell admitted publicly that he had gone too far, that he had seen a photograph of himself and genuinely did not recognize it as his own face. He described the experience of looking at himself and feeling he resembled something out of a horror film. His son, Eric, who was 8 years old at the time, reportedly reacted to his father's appearance with unrestrained amusement. Cowell has said that reaction became a turning point. He announced that he had removed all filler from his face and intended to stop. He stated there was no filler in his face at all. Zero. Whether that proved entirely true or lasting is harder to confirm. In October 2025, reports emerged suggesting that people close to Cowell were again expressing concern about his appearance and the amount of time he was spending in clinics. What is clear is that the broader arc of his transformation, gradual accumulation, public alarm, personal recognition, and then stated course correction, became one of the most visible examples in modern entertainment of how incremental cosmetic decisions can produce outcomes no individual step would have predicted. What Cowell's story illustrates, perhaps more clearly than any other case on this list, is that the path toward a botched transformation is rarely dramatic. It doesn't require a single catastrophic decision. It can happen one small appointment at a time, over years, until one day the face in the mirror no longer matches the face in memory. When reconstruction becomes a cycle, Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke was, in the 1980s, one of the most compelling actors in Hollywood. His performances in films like 9.5 Weeks, Angel Heart, and Barfly earned him a reputation as raw, unpredictable, and magnetic in a way that was uniquely his own. His face was part of that identity, rugged, angular, intense. When he was on screen, audiences watched him differently than they watched other actors. There was an unguarded quality to him that the camera picked up, and his physical presence was inseparable from it. In 1991, at the height of a career most actors would spend their lives building, Rourke walked away from it. He chose to pursue professional boxing. The decision surprised the industry. Rourke had been an amateur boxer before becoming an actor, and apparently the pull of the ring never fully left him. What followed was a period in which he fought professionally, won several bouts, and absorbed an extraordinary amount of physical punishment. His face paid the price. His nose was broken at least twice. He sustained damage to a cheekbone that required surgical repair. The physical injuries accumulated to the point where reconstructive surgery became medically necessary. Rourke underwent 5 separate operations on his nose alone, along with surgery on his shattered cheekbone. Cartilage from his ear was used to rebuild nasal structure. The corrective work was complicated by scar tissue that did not heal cleanly. But the deeper problem, by his own account, was the surgeon he chose for the work. In a candid 2009 interview, Rourke said that most of the changes to his face came from attempting to repair the damage from boxing, but that he went to the wrong person to do it. He has described the experience as one in which the medical corrections compounded the original damage rather than resolving it. Subsequent cosmetic procedures, facelifts, additional work to address the changes caused by earlier operations, layered on top of a foundation that was already structurally compromised. By the time Rourke returned to serious acting work in the mid-2000s, his appearance had changed so substantially that the shift itself became part of his public story. His 2008 performance in The Wrestler, for which he received an Academy Award nomination, was in many ways shaped by and inseparable from that transformation. The character he played was a man whose body bore the visible cost of choices made decades earlier. Rourke has spoken about his appearance with varying degrees of emotion over the years, sometimes with humor, sometimes with evident pain. He has acknowledged that the surgical path he took did not produce the outcomes he hoped for, and that the choice of surgeon was the pivotal mistake. In 2009, he told a reporter that he went to the wrong person to put his face back together, a remark that has been quoted in nearly every subsequent account of his transformation because it captures something essential about his situation. The damage from boxing was real and required real medical intervention. The cascade of consequences that followed came from a single decision about who to trust with that intervention. The physical result was a face that bore increasingly little resemblance to the one that had appeared on screen in the 1980s. His nose, repeatedly operated on, took on a tightened and unnatural profile. His cheeks, his jawline, the overall architecture of his face shifted in ways that plastic surgery specialists have described as compounding over time, each procedure interacting with the scarring and altered tissue left by the last one. Some reports have suggested that additional cosmetic work, beyond the reconstructive procedures, was performed along the way, though what was medically necessary and what was elective is difficult to separate cleanly from the public record. What is clear is that Rourke himself has never entirely made peace with the outcome. He returned to acting, delivered one of his finest performances in The Wrestler, and attempted to rebuild a career that his earlier decisions had derailed. The industry received him, but the face the cameras turned to was not the one the industry had fallen in love with 2 decades before. His case is distinct from the others on this list because it did not begin with vanity. It began with a legitimate medical need. But the chain of decisions that followed, the reconstruction, the corrections to the corrections, the cosmetic additions layered over compromised tissue, produced a transformation that became irreversible. By the time Rourke was appearing on Celebrity Big Brother in the United Kingdom in April 2025, at 72 years old, his altered appearance was one of the first things commentators addressed. The face that had defined his career in the 1980s was, in a meaningful sense, gone. Not because of a single catastrophic error, but because of a long sequence of decisions that began with an injury sustained in a boxing ring more than 3 decades ago. Closing thoughts. These 5 cases, Evangelista, Presley, Rogers, Cowell, and Rourke, span different decades, different motivations, and very different circumstances. One was deceived by a criminal. One was failed by a legitimate procedure's rare side effects. One was the victim of a skilled surgeon who overcorrected. One accumulated changes one session at a time until the damage became undeniable. And one began with physical necessity and ended somewhere no one intended. What they share is the permanence of the outcome. Faces, once significantly altered, are rarely fully restored. Medical-grade corrective procedures can improve certain outcomes, but they cannot fully undo what has been done, particularly when the original tissue has been changed, removed, or replaced. The architecture of the face is built over decades of genetics, movement, and natural aging. When it is disrupted by the wrong substance, the wrong technique, or simply too many interventions applied over too many years, the path back is often partial at best and completely blocked at worst. The cosmetic industry in 2026 is larger, more accessible, and more aggressively marketed than at any point in its history. Procedures that once required surgical consultation are now performed in spas. Substances that once required years of safety data are introduced with minimal long-term study. Non-invasive treatments are marketed with the language of wellness, obscuring the fact that any intervention capable of producing a cosmetic result is also capable of producing an unwanted one. The social media landscape has made before and after imagery ubiquitous, normalizing dramatic physical transformation in a way that previous generations would have found startling. The pressure on public figures to maintain their appearance has not diminished, and neither has the pressure, increasingly, on people who are not public figures at all. The celebrities profiled here had access to resources, medical teams, and professional advisors that most people do not, and yet these outcomes still happened. These stories are not arguments against cosmetic procedures. They are arguments for understanding what you are agreeing to, who is performing it, and what the realistic outcomes, including the rare and difficult ones, actually are. The difference between a refreshed appearance and a permanently altered one can sometimes come down to a single misjudged millimeter of tissue, a single unlicensed syringe, or a single appointment that becomes the first of many. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.